Hello guys, one of the most popular ideas of the Soviet propaganda that survived in modern Russian propaganda is definitely about the decaying and rotting West. It is also the best demonstration of the Kremlin's hypocrisy. When children of Putin, Medvedev, Lavrov, Shoigu, Gerasimov, Peskov, Solovyov all study and live abroad in the so-called rotting West, and their parents keep describing life outside Russia as miserable. I do have this question as a Ukrainian. If the West is decaying, why do you send your precious children into that rotting West? And I also have a question why millions of Russians do not have the same question. Why do they keep listening to Solovyov, who describes, let's say, the United Kingdom as an evil land, but at the same time keeps his children in the country for decades, not wanting them to return back to masse Russia? Don't get offended when I say the rotting or decaying West, because that's the phrase I repeat after the Kremlin. And by the way, from this Russian perspective, Ukraine is also a part of the rotting and decaying West. And that is why their soldiers, when occupying Kyiv region, for example, were so surprised with the wealth of the Ukrainian middle class. Yes, we do have new sneakers, good airports and other stuff. Something that seems wealth to this truly miserable poor people. So let's talk about this very idea of the rotting West. Why is it so popular in the Russian culture, in the so-called Russian culture? And how did it change during these years? Many say that the very idea of this decaying, rotting West came into Russian discourse in times of the Napoleon Wars. But of course, it became widespread during the Cold War, when the Soviets tried competing with the United States, kept failing because life in the Soviet Union was never equal to the life in the United States. Maybe they matched in this, marathon of missiles and nuclear weapons, but that was totally different if we look at the quality of apartments, quality of life, food, clothes, and so on. Please subscribe to demonstrate your solidarity with Ukraine and to learn more about this extremely important period in history and an extremely under-discovered, if it's possible to say so, part of the world. So during the Cold War period, censorship was super spread around the USSR, and people literally did not know how others live in the United States or Canada. So Soviet propaganda lied a lot. What is interesting, if, for example, an American person wanted to travel to the USSR, it would be impossible because the USSR would not let the person in. If a Soviet person wanted to travel, it was also impossible because the USSR would not let. Of course, some artists, dancers, athletes managed to travel on the permission of the party, or, to some communist-friendly countries, but for an ordinary Soviet citizen, it was impossible. So we see that in both cases, the USSR was the one denying access, denying entry. Tell me, please, if everything was right, if the West was rotting, why would they prevent people from traveling to France and seeing how better life in, Belarus is? Well, pretty obvious. And after the collapse of the USSR, millions and millions and millions of people fled to the West. And they enjoyed life there. No one wanted to return. We don't see a tendency of people, there was a huge Russian immigration to France after the Russian Revolution, and like you don't see thousands of people coming back to Russia when it was finally free from the communists. It was never actually free from the communists, but when it looked like that. Also, it's a very, very illustrative thing, by the way. You don't see millions of people that dream to move to Russia. Of course, there are cases, they demonstrated on news that some Americans or some people from the European Union move deep inside Russia. But these are unique cases. That's why they are on TV, they are being interviewed. It's not the tendency. If you, for example, go into the German or French or Polish university, you will not come across dozens of students who dream to at least live and work for 2 years in Russia. You will have a lot of such people with dreams to visit and spend some time in the US, in Australia, in South Africa, in France, but not true about Russia. And a very interesting thing that we observe right now is Putin's fear to conscript people. First of all, it is something amazing, this kind of relationship that the Kremlin has with the population. Once again, I have a separate video that I will connect here on the main channel about the Kremlin children with more details, whose children and where exactly study and live in Europe and how sanctions influence that. But I don't know why millions of Russians do not ask questions. If Russia is so great, if our education is so great, why Putin's daughters live in the European Union? Do they sacrifice their lives and, I don't know, give more space to other good Russians? That is ridiculous, right? So with all that, with the very idea of the rotten West, and this like slow movement of Russian brains outside Russia, we observe a tremendous shift, a tremendous increase of people running out of Russia at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. You know that Putin fears to begin this open mobilization conscription because then millions will try to escape and maybe some will even protest. As a Ukrainian, I'm pretty realistic about the state of the Russian population mindset, and I understand they will not protest against Russian war crimes in Ukraine. They will not protest against the war itself. Come on, what we witness right now is some lonely protests of one elderly lady or one girl, but there are no movements, there are no changes, and we may not speak about any serious like organizations, anti-war organizations. And you may say it's dangerous inside Russia. And I will ask you, is it dangerous outside Russia? Never overestimate the number of, the special agents that can harm Russians outside Russia. They don't have that many resources. They may hunt important oppositioners, faces of anti-Putin movements, but it's not dangerous for people, ordinary Russians who live somewhere in Turkey or in Georgia. And it's not more dangerous than, for example, me vlogging and telling the truth about Russian crimes in Ukraine. So come on. So what is interesting, when at the beginning Putin tried this general conscription, hundreds of thousands and approximate estimates actually tell from 500,000 to 1 million Russians fled the country. And at the very beginning, there were huge queues on the borders, and many of them actually walked on feet or rode bicycles to get out of Russia faster. So honestly, we have approximately at least 1 million young active Russians who fled the country after they realized they didn't want to participate in the war. And here an important fact: this doesn't make them good Russians. They did not protest against war. They did not try to stop it. They simply did not want to be conscripted. They did not want to spend nights in the trenches, to risk themselves, and so on. So they moved. The countries that were super popular, perhaps it was easier to get there, is Turkey, of course, United Arab Emirates, Georgia, the Baltic countries. And by the way, let me know in the comments below, did you observe any waves of young Russians moving to your country? And let me know which country after the beginning or maybe now of the war. So there are hundreds of thousands of these people that stay in these countries. And many of these countries are kind to them, understand that Russia is a dictatorship, supports their will to escape that dictatorship. But do you know of any serious movements of this young, active Russian, and some people say even brains, because many of them come from, this IT businesses, from some mid-sized businesses. They were more or less successful. They did not want to stay. They did not want to risk what they have. So they moved outside Russia. Russia does not have enough FSB agents, to hunt every little protester somewhere in France. But do you observe such strikes and meetings? We may see something happening in Berlin, but this will be pro-Putin. And I, by the way, wonder why glorifying Vladimir Putin in Berlin, they don't choose to move to Moscow or St. Petersburg and keep glorifying the Kremlin dictator there. It would be way more comfortable. So that is another, hypocrisy about Russia that I cannot understand. Why? All of you agree that West is bad, but you send your children or you escape to the West. By the way, many of those who fled will keep describing the countries they fled to in a negative way. But let's abandon this topic. It may be very complex. And let's just switch to these thousands of people who escaped Putin's terror and now free to protest, now free to express their will, now free to speak. How painful it is to watch what Russia does to Ukraine, that they share this collective responsibility, or they don't want to share this collective responsibility, but they at least have to pronounce something, and they don't. And they don't. They keep thinking like, my family or something. Come on, there are millions. They cannot go after each million. And in my city, every night I have drones on the streets, and I stay here because that's my country. I fight for its future. By the way, the fact that no one is protesting inside, the fact that no one is organizing any serious, maybe not even political, but at least social, ideological movements, I am sure this movement would have been supported way better by the European Union or the United States than even Ukrainian, because somehow this, as Russians say, rotting West keeps looking for good Russians. Sometimes I have this feeling it's a new hobby, like to find good Russians. And here, I don't mean individual people, because they happen, they exist, I know. But I'm talking about them about the category. How to Win Information War is a really great book of Peter Pomerantsev, where he speaks about the same thing in Nazi Germany. That, of course, there were lots of good individuals, but you could not find a category of good Germans who stood as a movement, as a political or military rebellious stance against Hitler. So we don't see anything like that inside Russia or now outside Russia with millions of good Russians. What stands behind this idea of a rotting West? What is interesting, they don't explain much. Just as Ruski Mir, that's an idea that unites uncombinable thing, just like a kaleidoscope of shit. I'm sorry. Just imagine. That's a very strong metaphor. I'm sorry for using it. So they simply say everything is very bad in the United States, but my children live there. I'm sorry. This does not sound persuasive. And this idea of the superiority of the Russian culture, was actually totally ruined by the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Let me know in the comments below. Would you like a separate video about my understanding of the modern Russian culture? Because many use it, as an excuse, as something that like we have to value Russia for, we have to forgive a lot of things because they possess this Russian culture. And I have my very strong opinion, and I believe a lot of arguments to prove you wrong. Because culture is responsible for the nurturing of people. And in Russia, they failed tremendously. So let me know, would you like a topic about that on the channel? And also maybe about Ruski Mir. We can talk a lot, because that is an instrument they use to trick a lot of naive people who did not read enough books. Anyway, subscribe to this channel, let our community grow, and share these videos because they help fight Russian propaganda that unfortunately circulates the world and poisons the minds for at least a century, and that is a lot. No other authoritarian regime succeeded that long. But we keep on defeating and demilitarizing Russia, and once again, to like, comment, subscribe, and share is the best way to demonstrate your solidarity with Ukraine. And also follow me on other social media channels. You will find the links in the description of this video. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channel. That's an honor to have you in my life. And I'm very grateful for all the advice that you provide in comments. I always read them and they inspire my future videos. And thank you once again for being friends of Ukraine, for being friends of mine. And let's protect our precious West and our precious South and North and East from the evil monsters of the Kremlin. Slava Ukraini!